From the thick darkness of the Middle Ages, man's struggling spirit emerged as in new birth, breaking out of the iron control of that period, growing strong and confident in the tug and din of succeeding conflict and revolution. It bounded forwards and upwards with resistless vigor to the investigation of physical and moral truth, ascending height after height, sweeping afar over the earth, penetrating afar up into the heavens, increasing in endeavor, enlarging in endowment, everywhere boldly, earnestly, outstretching, till, in the author of the Principia, one arose, who, grasping the master key of the universe and trending its celestial paths, opened up to the human intellect the stupendous realities of the material world, and, in the unrolling of its harmonies, gave to the human heart a new song to the goodness, wisdom, and majesty of the all-creating, all-sustaining, all-perfect God. Sir Isaac Newton, in whom the rising intellect seemed to obtain, as it were, to its culminating point, was born on the 25th of December, 1642, Christmas Day, at Woolsthorpe, in the parish of Colsterworth, in Lincolnshire. His father, John Newton, died at the age of 36, and only a few months after his marriage to Harriet Ayscough, daughter of James Ayscough, of Rutlandshire. Mrs. Newton, probably wrought upon by the early loss of her husband, gave premature birth to her only and posthumous child, of which too, from its extreme diminutiveness, she appeared likely to be soon bereft. Happily, it was otherwise decreed. The tiny infant, on whose little lips the breath of life so doubtingly hovered, lived to a vigorous maturity, to a hale old age, lived to become the boast of his country, the wonder of his time, and the ornament of his species. Beyond the grandfather, Robert Newton, the descent of Sir Isaac cannot with certainty be traced. Two traditions were held in the family. One, that they were of Scotch extraction. The other, that they came originally from Newton in Lancashire, dwelling for a time, however, at Westby, county of Lincoln, before the removal to and purchase of Woolsthorpe, about 100 years before this memorable birth. The widow Newton was left with the simple means of a comfortable subsistence. The Woolsthorpe estate, together with small ones which she possessed at Sowstern in Leicestershire, yielded her an income of some £80, and upon this limited sum she had to rely chiefly for the support of herself and the education of her child. She continued his nurture for 3 years, when, marrying again, she confided the tender charge to the care of her own mother. Great genius is seldom marked by precocious development, and young Isaac, sent at the usual age to 2-day schools at Skillington and Stoke, exhibited no unusual traits of character. In his 12th year he was placed at the public school at Grantham, and boarded at the house of Mr. Clark, an apothecary. But even in this excellent seminary his mental acquisitions continued for a while unpromising enough. Study apparently had no charms for him. He was very inattentive and ranked low in the school. One day, however, the boy immediately above our seemingly dull student gave him a severe kick in the stomach. Isaac, deeply affected, but with no outburst of passion, betook himself, with quiet, incessant toil, to his books. He quickly passed above the offending classmate. Yet there he stopped not. The strong spirit was, for once and forever, awakened, and, yielding to its noble impulse, he speedily took up his position at the head of all. His peculiar character began now rapidly to unfold itself. Close application grew to be habitual. Observation alternated with reflection. A sober, silent thinking lad, yet the wisest and the kindest, the indisputable leader of his fellows. Generosity, modesty, and a love of truth distinguished him then as ever afterwards. He did not often join his classmates in play, but he would contrive for them various amusements of a scientific kind. Paper kites he introduced, carefully determining their best form and proportions, and the position and number of points whereby to attach the string. He also invented paper lanterns. These served ordinarily to guide the way to school in winter mornings, but occasionally for quite another purpose. They were attached to the tails of kites in a dark night, to the dismay of the country people dreading portentous comets, and to the immeasurable delight of his companions. To him, however, young as he was, life seemed to have become an earnest thing. When not occupied with his studies, his mind would be engrossed with mechanical contrivances, now imitating, now inventing. He became singularly skillful in the use of his little saws, hatchets, hammers, and other tools. A windmill was erected near Grantham. During the operations of the workmen, he was frequently present. In a short time, he had completed a perfect working model of it, which elicited general admiration. Not content, however, with this exact imitation, he conceived the idea of employing, in the place of sails, animal power, and, adapting the construction of his mill accordingly, he enclosed it in a mouse, called the miller, and which by acting on a sort of treadwheel gave motion to the machine. He invented, too, a mechanical carriage having 4 wheels and put in motion with a handle worked by the person sitting inside. The measurement of time early drew his attention. He first constructed a water clock, in proportion somewhat like an old-fashioned house clock. The index of the dial plate was turned by a piece of wood acted upon by dropping water. This instrument, though long used by himself and by Mr. Clark's family, did not satisfy his inquiring mind. His thoughts rose to the sun, and by careful and oft-repeated observations of the solar movements he subsequently formed many dials. One of these, named Isaac's dial, was the accurate result of years' labor and was frequently referred to for the hour of the day by the country people. May we not discern in these continual efforts the diligent research, the patient meditation, the aspiring glance, and the energy of discovery, the stirring elements of that wondrous spirit which, clear, calm, and great, moved in after years through deep of nature's mysteries, unlocking her strongholds, dispelling darkness, educing order, everywhere silently conquering. Newton had an early and decided taste for drawing. Pictures, taken sometimes from copies, but often from life, and drawn, colored, and framed by himself, ornamented his apartment. He was skilled also in poetical composition, excellent in making verses. Some of these were borne in remembrance and repeated, 70 years afterwards, by Mrs. Vincent, for whom in early youth, as Miss Story, he formed an ardent attachment. She was the sister of a physician resident near Woolsthorpe, but Newton's intimate acquaintance with her began at Grantham, where they were both numbered among the inmates of the same house. 2 or 3 years younger than himself, of great personal beauty and unusual talent, her society afforded him the greatest pleasure, and their youthful friendship, it is believed, gradually rose to a higher passion. But inadequacy of fortune prevented their union. Miss Story was afterwards twice married, Newton never. His esteem for her continued unabated during life, accompanied by numerous acts of attention and kindness. In 1656, Newton's mother was again left a widow, and took up her abode once more at Woolsthorpe. He was now 15 years of age, and had made great progress in his studies. But she, desirous of his help, and from motives of economy recalled him from school. Business occupations, however, and the management of the farm proved utterly distasteful to him. When sent to Grantham Market on Saturdays, he would betake himself to his former lodgings in the apothecary's garret, where some of Mr. Clark's old books employed his thoughts, till the aged and trustworthy servant had executed the family commissions and announced the necessity of return. Or, at other times, our young philosopher would seat himself under a hedge by the wayside and continue his studies till the same faithful personage, proceeding alone to the town and completing the day's business, stopped as he returned. The more immediate affairs of the farm received no better attention. In fact, his passion for study grew daily more absorbing, and his dislike for every other occupation more intense. His mother, therefore, wisely resolved to give him all the advantages which an education could confer. He was sent back to Grantham School, where he remained for some months in busy preparation for his academical studies. At the recommendation of one of his uncles, who had himself studied at Trinity College, Cambridge, Newton proceeded thither and was duly admitted on the 5th day of June, 1660, in the 18th year of his age. The eager student had now entered upon a new and wider field, and we find him devoting himself to the pursuit of knowledge with amazing ardor and perseverance. Among other subjects, his attention was soon drawn to that of judicial astrology. He exposed the folly of this pseudoscience by erecting a figure with the aid of one or two of the problems of Euclid, and thus began his study of the mathematics. His researches into this science were prosecuted with unparalleled vigor and success. Regarding the propositions contained in Euclid as self-evident truths, he passed rapidly over this ancient system, a step which he afterwards much regretted, and mastered, without further preparatory study, the analytical geometry of Descartes. Wallace's arithmetic of infinities, Saunderson's logic, and the optics of Kepler, he also studied with great care, writing upon them many comments, and in these notes on Wallace's work was undoubtedly the germ of his fluxionary calculus. His progress was so great that he found himself more profoundly versed than his tutor in many branches of learning. Yet his acquisitions were not gotten with the rapidity of intuition, but they were thoroughly made and firmly secured. Quickness of apprehension or intellectual nimbleness did not belong to him. He saw too far. His insight was too deep. He dwelt fully, cautiously upon the least subject, while to the consideration of the greatest, he brought a massive strength joined with a matchless clearness that, regardless of the merely trivial or unimportant, bore with unerring sagacity upon the prominences of the subject, and grappling with its difficulty, rarely failed to surmount them. His early and fast friend, Dr. Barrow, in compass of invention only inferior to Newton, who had been elected professor of Greek in the university in 1660, was made Lucasian professor of mathematics in 1663, and soon afterward delivered his optical lectures. The manuscripts of these were revised by Newton, and several oversights corrected, and many important suggestions made by him, but they were not published till 1669. In the year 1665, he received the degree of Bachelor of Arts, and in 1666 he entered upon those brilliant and imposing discoveries which have conferred inappreciable benefits upon science and immortality upon his own name. Newton himself states that he was in possession of his method of fluxions in the year 1666 or before. Infinite quantities had long been a subject of profound investigation among the ancients by Archimedes and Pappus of Alexandria, among the moderns by Kepler, Cavalieri, Roberval, Fermat, and Wallis, With consummate ability, Dr. Wallace had improved upon the labors of his predecessors. With a higher power, Newton moved forward from where Wallace stopped. Our author first invented his celebrated binomial theorem, and then, applying this theorem to the rectification of curves and to the determination of the surfaces and contents of solids, and the position of their centers of gravity, he discovered the general principle of deducing the areas of curves from the ordinate by considering the area as a nascent quantity increasing by continual fluxion in the proportion of the length of the ordinate, and supposing the abscissa to increase uniformly in proportion to the time. Regarding lines as generated by the motion of points, surfaces by the motion of lines, and solids by the motion of surfaces, and considering that the ordinates abscissae nc of curves thus formed vary according to a regular law depending on the equation of the curve, he deduced from this equation the velocities with which these quantities are generated, and obtained by the rules of infinite series the ultimate value required. To the velocities with which every line or quantity is generated, he gave the name fluxions, and to the lines or quantities themselves that of fluents, a discovery that successfully baffled the acutest and strongest intellects, that, variously modified, has proved of incalculable service in aiding to develop the most abstruse and the highest truths in mathematics and astronomy, and that was of itself enough to render any name illustrious in the crowded annals of science. At this period, the most distinguished philosophers were directing all their energies to the subject of light and the improvement of the refracting telescope. Newton, having applied himself to the grinding of optic glasses of other figures than spherical, experienced the impracticability of executing such lenses, and conjectured that their defects, and consequently those of refracting telescopes, might arise from some other cause than the imperfect convergencies of rays to a single point. He accordingly procured a triangular glass prism to try therewith the celebrated phenomena of colors. His experiments entered upon with zeal, and conducted with that industry, accuracy, and patient thought, for which he was so remarkable, resulted in the grand conclusion that light was not homogeneous, but consisted of rays, some of which were more refrangible than others. This profound and beautiful discovery opened up a new era in the history of optics. As bearing, however, directly upon the construction of telescopes, he saw that a lens refracting exactly like a prism would necessarily bring the different rays to different foci, at different distances from the glass, confusing and rendering the vision indistinct. Taking for granted that all bodies produced spectra of equal length, he dismissed all further consideration of the refracting instrument, and took up the principle of reflection. Rays of all colors, he found, were reflected regularly, so that the angle of reflection was equal to the angle of incidence, and hence he concluded that optical instruments might be brought to any degree of perfection imaginable, provided reflecting specula of the requisite figure and finish could be obtained. At this stage of his optical researches, he was forced to leave Cambridge on account of the plague, which was then desolating England. He retired to Woolsthorpe. The old manor house in which he was born was situated in a beautiful little valley on the west side of the river Witham, and here, in the quiet home of his boyhood, he passed his days in serene contemplation, while the stalking pestilence was hurrying its tens of thousands into undistinguishable graves. Towards the close of a pleasant day in the early autumn of 1666, he was seated alone beneath a tree in his garden, absorbed in meditation. He was a slight young man, in the 24th year of his age, his countenance mild and full of thought. For a century previous, the science of astronomy had advanced with rapid strides. The human mind had risen from the gloom and bondage of the Middle Ages in unparalleled vigor to unfold the system, to investigate the phenomena, and to establish the laws of the heavenly bodies. Copernicus, Tycho Brahe, Kepler, Galileo, and others had prepared and lighted the way for him who was to give to their labor its just value, and to their genius its true luster. At his biting isolated facts were to take order as parts of one harmonious whole, and sagacious conjectures grow luminous in the certain splendor of demonstrated truth. And this ablest man had come, was here. His mind, familiar with the knowledge of past effort, and its unequaled faculties developed in transcendent strength, was now moving on to the very threshold of its grandest achievement. Step by step, the untrodden path was measured, till, at length, the entrance seemed disclosed, and the tireless explorer to stand amid the first opening wonders of the universe, the nature of gravity.